On today's show, what is the Nets' attitude towards a Michael Porter Jr. trade at the deadline? What other Nets could be moved? What are Brooklyn's next rebuild steps? I'll answer all those fan questions and more on today's episode of Locked On Nets.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And on today's episode, it's Fan Take Friday. I took questions and takes from Nets fans and listeners on a wide range of subjects. And good to get into some trade stuff first. We've got a lot of trade questions a couple of weeks out from the deadline. First question, is there a sell-high vibe / sentiment surrounding a potential MPJ trade? If so, what could a Nets return and trade partner look like? Argument against trading is that we do not have control of our first rounder next year, and he's easily our best player. Okay, so yes, Michael Porter Jr., obviously, he's going to be the talk of the Nets for the next 2 weeks leading up to the trade deadline because he is arguably the top player on the market or the best player widely perceived to be available. And if you're asking if there's a sell high vibe / sentiment, I think that the Nets do view this as an opportunity to sell high, but I ultimately don't know if that's going to come to fruition because you just look at the teams around the league and some of the trade partners that you thought that the Nets might have had are kind of drying up. Like you look at the Golden State Warriors, Jimmy Butler tears his ACL. They seem like they're not going to make a significant move like that at that point, or at least make a move that meets the Nets asking price, which is perceivably like 2 first-round picks or 1 really good first-round pick. You look at the Milwaukee Bucks, another team that's been rumored, like they're playing really bad as of late. Could they still, push their last chip in and trade that unprotected 2031 draft pick to the Nets for MPJ? They could do it, but if I were them, I wouldn't do it. It wouldn't make that much sense to me with how they're playing, so I wouldn't rule them out, but I think it's looking less and less likely. The Detroit Pistons, there's not really any rumors of them, making a significant deadline move. Everything that I've heard has been about them kind of standing pat, maybe making a small move, and outside of that, there's always other teams that could get involved, but the vibe or sentiment that I've got from the Nets organization surrounding an MPJ trade, from the things I've heard, when the Nets traded for Michael Porter Jr., they were viewing it more as this is a guy who's going to be a flippable asset. He's a player who, people are down on him right now, his salary and all those things, and they felt like they would be able to rehabilitate him and get more value, extract more value out of him for the return for Cam Johnson. They viewed it that way from what I've heard, as opposed to him necessarily being like a long-term piece that they were going to sign to an extension and build forward with. Now, could that have changed, with the way that he's played in the first half of this season? If I had to say right now, based on what I've heard, I don't think so. I think that they're still looking at him as a flippable asset. So if I had to bet my money on it, I would say that they're looking to flip him either at the trade deadline or the offseason. But with that, I have heard that they're very comfortable holding him into the offseason if they don't get an offer to their liking at the deadline. And that makes sense because if you're not getting an offer to your liking, you can hold him into the offseason when more teams are going to have a better sense of where they are. They're going to have more picks available to trade. Another thing that must be said in the MPJ trade conversation is that there are some teams that are just in a holding pattern right now. Like the Giannis Antetokounmpo sweepstakes is holding up a lot of things around the league because teams are waiting to see whether he's going to be on the move ahead of the deadline. And with that, you get into the offseason, there's going to be more clarity around the league. There's going to be more teams that have more picks available to trade. Like the Bucks, for example, I just talked about them. When you get into the offseason, they can trade 2 or 3 first-round picks as opposed to just the 1 that they can trade right now. So that's a huge difference. Like around the draft, there's going to be a lot more activity. There's going to be a lot more teams that have a better sense. So to answer your question, I would say that there is a sell high vibe or a flip vibe surrounding Michael Porter Jr., but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be at the deadline. I would say, if they don't get the offer that they like, they're very comfortable holding on to him and they can regroup in the offseason, similar to what they did with Cam Johnson this past summer. Next question. What do you think of this strategy? Trade MPJ for Darius Garland, allow Garland to fully recover from his ailments this season, and then have a proven point guard on the roster for 2026-27 and 2027-28. That's from Tyler Stevens. Me personally, I'm not that high on like the Darius Garland archetype. I think we're seeing the league move farther and farther away from undersized guards who struggle to defend. But I would say Darius Garland is a proven offensive player. Like, I think he's having a down year this year, but he has been battling injuries. But I think that if you're comfortable and you're confident in his medicals that he's going to be okay, like, he could be an interesting like bridge piece. Like I talked about it on the last Fan Take Friday I did with Lucas Kaplan. And the Nets are going to need to look for some of those bridge guys, on this next deal. Like, if they can't find going into this coming season, like that young star that they really think can be like a foundational core piece for them moving forward, what you can also try to do is get that bridge guy. Like, the Knicks had Julius Randle, and he kind of was the springboard for them to go into that next iteration of their team. And the Nets could try to look for that guy. And I think a lot of those guys could come as buy low candidates. Like, you look around the league, there's a lot of these guys, who are, kind of distressed assets right now. Trae Young just went to the Wizards, like John Morant, Zion Williamson, Darius Garland, you could throw in that conversation. Like, there's a lot of those different, kind of guys who could get in the mix for different teams. And I think that the Nets will be in the mix for those guys this offseason. Like, if you're asking me, how do I think the Nets are going to take their step forward towards competing next season? I would say internal development. And I would say getting a proven, offensive engine in here. And I think a lot of that, a lot of their prospects of doing that are going to come in the form of buy low guys. And yes, Darius Garland could fit into that equation. So I wouldn't be like totally opposed to it. I could see the logic behind it, especially since he's only under contract for the next 2 seasons after this. So you're not locking yourself into like a 3, 4, 5 year deal. So that, from that sense, I could see the logic behind it, but I'm not that high on the Darius Garland archetype. And I don't think the rest of the league is either. So we'll see how that plays out with him. Next question. In your opinion, how likely are the Nets to sell off any pieces before the trade deadline? If they do anything at all, is it more likely they sell off a big piece like MPJ or Claxton, or operate as a third team in a trade to take back a contract into cap space for an asset? And that's from Free the Truth 17. I would say that the prospect of them selling off any pieces, I think they're going to sell off some pieces. Like, I just did a article on Clutch Points. Go check it out. Most likely Nets to be traded. And I put MPJ in there. I put Haywood Highsmith in there. But the main guy I would say is most likely to be traded is Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas and Haywood Highsmith are the 2 guys that I would point to. And I know that that's not like the splashiest, but I think that those are guys like Cam Thomas. It's clear, like, it's done for him here. He's, he's playing with the second unit. He's lost his starting job. He's not playing well as of late. It seems like it's just trending in a direction where it doesn't make sense for either side. So I think that the Nets are going to try to trade him for whatever they can. There just isn't really a market for him right now. So he could be a salary filler in one of those deals that you were talking about at the end of the question about like them being a facilitator for another team using their cap space. But, just going back to the other pieces, like a big piece like MPJ or Clax, with both of those guys, I think they're in similar buckets. Like, they're on the market. The Nets are very willing to listen to offers, but if they don't get the offers that they like, they don't have to trade either of them right now. Like MPJ, they can hold him into the offseason. Clax, I think he'll actually be more attractive in the offseason because he's making less money next season and the season after that. The Nets front-loaded his contract, so the final 2 years after this are at a lower cap hit. So it will be easier to move in terms of matching his salary, and it should be more attractive. So MPJ, Clax, if I had to say right now, I'd say I don't think either of them get traded. Obviously, that can change. Like, things really heat up when you get like a week away from the deadline, but that's my feeling right now. The smaller guys, I would say, are more likely, whether you talk about a Cam Thomas or a Haywood Highsmith. And then the other type of, kind of iteration of a deal that you talked about, the Nets using their cap space, because the Nets do have $15 million in cap space left. They have the most in the league, and they are going to be, if there are teams trying to make bigger deals work, they can be a facilitator of that. If there's, teams just looking to get off of money and dip below the luxury tax or the first apron, they can be one of those teams. So I expect the Nets to be active. Does anything significant come to fruition before the deadline? That remains to be seen. But next question on a similar note, when do you think Cam Thomas will be traded, and what is his value? What could we realistically get for him? I'm thinking a second-round pick. That's from Gabe Miller. I touched on that briefly in the previous answer, but I think that Cam will get moved before the deadline. I think that it will be closer to the deadline because I think that could very well be not just like the Nets trading Cam to another team who are just trading for Cam. I think that could be part of a bigger deal. And once those other bigger deals start to gain traction and there starts to be some talks around the league, I think that the Nets could be a factor in there, and Cam can just be like a salary filler, or he can be, just a sweetener for some team. Like, from everything that I've heard, for pretty much over a year now, Cam has had very little trade or free agent market. There's been no team that's been willing to trade anything significant for him. And I don't think that that's trading after this season where he, suffered another hamstring injury, his fourth in a year span. The Nets got much better after he exited the lineup, and he's come back, and now he's coming off the bench, and he's, playing pretty poorly, at least from an offensive standpoint. So I don't think the Nets are going to get much for him, but I think that he could be just like a throw in, and it's really just going to be kind of like a parting of ways. I don't expect him to get anything back significant for him. Last question before a break. What do you think is the likelihood of the Nets trading for Jimmy Butler's contract? Who do you think the Nets would send out in a deal like that, and how many picks would you want in that deal? That's from Tanny G. I think the likelihood of the Nets trading for Jimmy Butler's contract is very unlikely. I do not see that happening at all, and that's for a multitude of reasons, because for the Nets to take on Jimmy Butler's contract, and he's making, $50 million this season and something around $50 million next season, they'd have to be heavily compensated for that to a point where it's not going to make sense for the Warriors. Like the Warriors, I don't think are going to pay that much to get off his deal, especially when you get to the offseason. He'll have 1 year left. He'll be an expiring contract. Maybe the Giannis sweepstakes is in full throttle then. Like, it just makes more sense for them to hold him when they'll probably have to give up less in the offseason, and it's just going to be easier to make a deal. So for that reason, I don't see it as likely. I did throw out one hypothetical trade that I posted on Twitter. If the Nets and the Warriors, if the Warriors were looking to really try to retool, a way they could do that would be, getting MPJ for Jimmy Butler's contract, and then also, moving Kuminga for something that they really like, or keeping Kuminga. In the scenario they want to move Kuminga for something else. Like the trade that I cooked up was the Nets get Jimmy Butler, Moses Moody, and the Warriors first round picks in 2026 and 28. The Warriors get MPJ and Terrence Mann, and then there was a side deal where the Warriors traded Kuminga for DeMar DeRozan. So the Warriors would come away with MPJ, DeRozan, Terrence Mann, and the Nets would get Jimmy Butler, Moody, and the Warriors first round picks in 2026 and 2028. And the holdup for that is, if I'm the Nets, I would consider that deal, especially for the fact because you're getting the Warriors 2026 first round pick, which you don't know where that could end up. Like Steph Curry could hurt himself and that pick could end up really high. And I think the Warriors would probably try to put some kind of protection on it. You're getting that. The 2028 first could also be a post Steph pick. Like you have no idea he's going to be, pushing 40 or over 40 at that point. So that could be a valuable asset. And then you also get Moses Moody. So, the downside to it was you'd have Jimmy Butler on your books for next season, and he's not going to play for most of the season. So that would be, it would be tough for you to compete in that regard. But, next season, I don't think the Nets are going to be that good anyway. But for me, if I were the Nets, I would consider it. I don't know if I would do it. I'd probably want more for that, in terms of draft capital to take on Jimmy Butler's contract and give up Michael Porter Jr. But the reason that's what I have the Nets getting back is because it's the only thing that I think the Warriors would consider. And even with that being like a generous deal for the Warriors in terms of what they're sending out, I still would completely not consider that if I were the Warriors. So I just don't really see a construction that's likely where the Nets are going to take on Jimmy Butler's contract, but that was kind of like the closest I could do. But we got a lot more trade questions. We got some questions about the Nets rebuild plans. We also got some questions about the Nets rookies. So I'll get into all that when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, during basketball season, there's nothing like being in the building, the energy, the crowd, that first big run that gets everyone on their feet. Fans want to be there for those moments, not stuck refreshing screens or guessing what tickets are really going to cost. That's where Game Time comes in. The Game Time app gives fans the advantage back, making it incredibly easy to score amazing tickets, fast, simple, and without the guesswork. Guys, browsing the Game Time app is straightforward and intuitive. Finding tickets takes just a few taps. Seeing the view from your seat before buying makes choosing tickets easy and confident. And prices include fees up front, so the total is clear from the start. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Coming back from the break, continuing today's Locked On Nets episode on this Fan Take Friday. Rolling on through all of your takes and questions. Next one, another trade question. Is it possible that the Nets pull off a Wizards-esque trade for an all-star player or all-star caliber and keep them on the shelf for next season? Example, Jaren Jackson Jr., Bam Adebayo, Khalil Ware, etc. That's from Afternoon. And I would say no. I just don't see that happening at this point this season. I think the Nets are firmly, kind of entrenched in this tanking agenda. I know that you said that you could keep them on the shelf for next season, but those guys that you threw out, Jaren Jackson Jr., I don't see the Grizzlies moving him ahead of the trade deadline. If I were the Nets, I'm not even sure how interested I would be in him with the contract that he has moving forward. Bam Adebayo, Kel'el Ware. I don't see the Heat moving those guys. Like, the guys you would talk about in that regard would be a guy like a John Morant, like a Zion Williamson. If the Pelicans were going to shop him, I would be out on John Morant. Zion's the guy that I would be interested in, but there's been no indications that the Pelicans are seriously shopping him right now. So I don't see that happening. Next question. What is the possibility of going after swap rights with the Pacers in a Nick Claxton deal? Could be the difference between pick 2 and 3 once lottery comes around, but it's not outright asking for their pick, just the swap rights. That's from Physically Educated, and I don't see the Pacers doing that. The Pacers have had interest in Nick Claxton. I think Mike Scotto, friend of the pod, reported that on Yes Network. He said that the Golden State Warriors and the Indiana Pacers were two teams that have checked in on Nick Claxton. The Warriors, their calculus might have changed with the Jimmy Butler injury. The Pacers, that makes sense for them because they're trying to replace Miles Turner. And while they are kind of mired in this tanking season right now with Tyrese Halliburton sideline, they're going to need to get a proven center ahead of next season when they're trying to compete. So Clax makes sense for them, but asking for swap rights on their pick this year, like, they're not going to do that, especially for a player of Nick Claxton's caliber, because that pick that they're going for, it would just take the ceiling off of it. Like, you're guaranteeing yourself the worst pick, and you're not going to do that for many players, and you're definitely not going to do that for a player of Nick Claxton's caliber, who's a nice player, but like, he's not the kind of guy that you would make that kind of move for. So I don't see that, but they do have some, matching salaries. Like, they could get, they have Obi Toppin, they have Benedict Mathurin, they have Jarris Walker, Isaiah Jackson. So they have matchable salaries and they have a lot of draft picks. Are they going to meet the next asking price, which is apparently, a good first-round pick, like an unprotected first-round pick or something along those lines for Nick Claxton? I'm pretty skeptical, but it's definitely something to keep tabs on. Next question. What do you make of MPJ disclosing his knee injury? Seems odd to hide an injury like that for weeks, only for a player to disclose it and not the team. That's from Ricky C. White. Yeah, I talked about it on last night's episode after the Knicks loss. And for those of you who don't know, MPJ told us at shoot-around before the Knicks game that he has been dealing with what he described as an MCL sprain. He said he sprained his MCL during that Magic loss where Paolo Banchero hit the game winner in overtime. But he said that, it's a minor MCL sprain. We asked Jordy Fernandez about it. Jordy said that MPJ has played all the way through, and if the Nets thought that he wasn't physically capable to play or if he was at risk for further injury or anything along those lines, that he wouldn't be playing. So what do I make of MPJ disclosing the knee injury? I would say that he's probably trying to justify, a little bit of why his production has dipped in recent games and just let people know what he's been going through. Because when you're a player who's going through an injury like that and you're not performing as well as you had been and people start to have questions about that, it's tough to just do that and not disclose the injury, especially when your team isn't disclosing the injury. Why would the Nets not disclose the injury? I think that it's pretty obvious it's for trade purposes because they don't want to see his value get hurt. Do I think that, it would hurt his value a ton? Probably not, because he's still going to have to go do a physical and the teams are going to have their own physicians check him out. But that's why the Nets didn't disclose it. They probably said, look, he's good enough to play. He wants to play. And if he's going to play, there's no reason for us to put this MCL sprain on the injury report and have have it add questions to some teams and potential trade negotiations. So that's what I see from the Nets end. And from MPJ's end, I think that he just wanted to kind of explain why his play has been lowered, because over his last 6 games, MPJ's at like 21 points, 43% from the field, 33% from three. So that's obviously a drop-off from his recent numbers. So that's what I would say for his motivation and the Nets' motivation. Next question. Based on the recent reports about MPJ having some MCL issues, do you see serious shutdown scenarios happening sooner rather than later? That is from Q. I would say shutdown. I don't know about shutdown, but I do think that it's definitely like the Nets could hold him out. Like, if they hold him through the deadline, and, there's not a trade offer that they like, and they still have him in the second half of the season, I expect them to be more aggressive about holding him out of some games, because at that point, there's no downside to holding him out. Like, that the trade isn't happening. It's not going to hurt his trade value. So I could see a scenario where after that point, maybe they say like the MCL's bothering him, on February 15th or something like that. The MCL's bothering him. He's going to be shut down for like a week or two. I could definitely see that happening. The Nets have yet to do that with players. Like, they didn't do that last season with Cam Johnson and some other guys, but MPJ is a guy who is dealing with a legitimate injury right now. It seems like he has an injury history, and the Nets also seem like they're being a little bit more aggressive about the tank this season than they were last season. So I could definitely see that. Got a few more questions, some about the draft, also some about just the Nets locker room dynamic overall. So get into all those when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern, I become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new, boosts, bonuses, and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. The timing is perfect right before the games and right before the weekend starts. It adds extra energy to Friday night basketball without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode on this Fan Take Friday. Rolling on through all your remaining takes and questions. Next question. After the top three in the draft, AJ, Boozer, Darren, would you still draft best player available, or do you go by position if there isn't too big of a drop-off? That's from Tanny G. I think you definitely go best player available. Like, the Nets are still in an early stage of a rebuild. They have so few solidified pieces on their roster. Like, the only guys on this roster who I would say are solidified moving forward, or at least the Nets are going to move forward with definitely, are the rookies. And like, the rookies are pretty malleable in terms of position, and none of them are good enough where they're going to preclude you from taking somebody who's better at a certain position. Like, you look at Yegor Dioman, he's obviously been classified as a point guard, but one of the benefits of his skill set is that he's probably going to be, or he's definitely going to be able to slide to the wing, and you can play him alongside a high usage ball handler. You look at the other rookies, like you have Nolan Troy, you have Ben Surratt. Those guys are obviously more traditional point guards, but I don't think that they're not at a level where they're going to preclude you from drafting another point guard, like, Michael Brown or whatever other player you want to say. If that guy is the first guy on your draft board, you draft him and you don't look back. You don't let these other guys dictate it. So I would say beyond those three guys, I think you definitely go for best player available. And the further that you get down the draft, maybe then it starts to change a little bit. But at the top of the draft, you're going for the best player. Next question. As someone who's been around the team, which players have been the biggest leaders? That's also from Tanny G. And I would say that the biggest leaders on this Nets team are just the veterans, like the older guys. Like, the guys that I would point to are Terrence Mann, Nick Claxton. I would also put Michael Porter Jr. in that equation. Like, those guys are the most significant and loudest voices in the locker room. And that's not surprising because they're the oldest guys. I think Terrence Mann gave a good quote to us the other day where Lucas Kaplan, part-time co-host on the pod here, asked him, like, what's the biggest lesson that you're trying to impart upon these Nets rookies while you're here as this veteran, as the eldest player on the team? And the thing that he said was, a lot of these guys are stars where they come from, almost all of them. They're used to having the ball. They're used to taking all the shots. They're used to being the featured guy. And he said there's a lot of money to be made in the NBA not being that guy, to be a guy who comes in, waits your turn, does all the right things, comes in early, leaves late, watches film, takes care of his body, is a good guy in the locker room. There's a lot of money to be made being that guy. I don't think that that's necessarily Terrence saying that, you don't want to reach for the stars and try to be the best player that you can be. It's just that, like, the teams, the end of the quote that he said, the teams that are successful in the NBA, a lot of guys fit into their roles and they know their roles and they buy into those roles. So that seems to be a lesson that he's trying to impart on these young guys, and it's a good one. And I think that that's just an example. As him, Nick Claxton, MPJ, some of these other guys, those are the loudest voices in the locker room. Next question. Based on your interactions with the coaching staff and access to practices, do you have any insight into how coaching staff are prioritizing the development of the Flatbush Five? What are some things the coaches are actively targeting for each of them? That's from Latin Gravity. And I think that there's definitely focuses, for each of them. I think, like, the one thing for overall for the whole draft class is trying to get them to understand the principles that they want the Nets to play with, and then just getting those guys to understand what goes into being a pro. And I think that goes back to that Terrence Mann quote that I just talked about, like, the things you do, the way that you approach it. And I think the way that you approach being a pro on a day-to-day, and I think that that's easier for some of these other Nets rookies, maybe as opposed to some college kids that come in, because you have guys like Yegor Dioman, Nolan Troy, Ben Surratt, who are international players who have been pro players for several years now. But if you're talking about what are individual skills that I think the coaches are honing in on, like with Yegor and Nolan, I would say that adding strength is a big one, because you look at Yegor, he's very limited as an advantage creator. He's very limited in his ability handle the ball and be comfortable handling the ball. And a lot of that is due to his lack of strength. Like, he's just overmatched physically at the point of attack and in the lane. And for Nolan, he's more comfortable handling the ball in the perimeter because he's a more natural ball handler. But once he gets downhill and gets into the lane, he's so limited in what he can do scoring around the basket because he's so slight. Like, he can't really get into the lane and play off 2 feet comfortably. Neither of those guys can. And that's going to be a big step, is adding strength, being able to play with physicality in the lane, and for Yegor at the point of attack, also defensively. So for Yegor and Nolan, I would say adding strength and adding some craft around the basket, that would be the biggest thing. For Danny, I would say the three-point shooting has been the main emphasis for the Nets team, and I understand why that is the case. Like, Danny told me when I interviewed him that the thing that the Nets were focusing on him during the pre-draft process and after they took him was, you have to be ready to shoot when you get the ball. You have to put it up. So the shooting development is going to be huge for Danny, and I understand why that's such an emphasis for the Nets with Danny, because you look at him and, he's not like, he has this ball handling ability. I mean, the biggest thing that he brings to the table is, as a 7-footer, he's an outlier in terms of his ability to handle the ball, in terms of his ability to be a playmaker. But with his, limited athleticism, with his kind of grounded athleticism, he's not at the level of on-ball creator where he's going to warrant doing it all the time. So because of that, he's going to need to play off the ball, and he's going to need to be a spot-up shooter. So if he can be a spot-up shooter, I think that will give him a role in a rotation, and that will allow him to, part of the time, he can be that on-ball guy, and then part of the time he could be that off-ball guy shooting. So that's a big emphasis for him. For Drake, I would say it's just kind of the three-point shooting is going to be huge, and then also developing the ancillary skills and secondary skills in his game, and I think that we've seen some process with that. And then for Ben Saraf, I'd say that it's a lot of different things. Like, Ben needs to get much better as a shooter. That's been the main focus. I've talked to Ben's shooting coach, and they've done a lot of work there, and he's very hopeful about Ben's outlook as a shooter. So the shooting, the craft, all of those things. But that's what I would say for all of those guys. Next question, excluding winning a championship, what would you consider a successful rebuild over the next 10 years? That's from Kimball Prime. And I would say that excluding a championship, to me, a successful rebuild would be building something that can have some sustainable success. Because if you talk about the Nets going back to, the Jersey days, like, everything that they have done in like the quick fixes, they've been trading for those star guys. They kind of been trying to build it on the fly. And that has led to a lot of windows that were fun for a little bit, but they were short-lived. And then after, they fizzled out and you're starting over. Whereas you talk about drafting that homegrown star, and that's why the 2025 and 2026 drafts are so important. And that's why I feel that, them trying to maximize their chances of getting a top pick in this coming draft is so important. Because if you get that guy, like, say they get a Darren Peterson and he turns into a stud for years to come, you have that guy who can be with you for an extended period, for a decade plus. And that's a way that you can build sustainable success, as opposed to kind of building it up with these spunky teams, trading everything in for these veterans, and then it not working out, and then you having to pivot and restart all over. So that's what I would say, is trying to build it with homegrown guys, trying to build something that can have some sustainable success, and trying to, kind of maximize your chances of building it out for the long term and having some players that fans can build some kind of attachment to. So that's what I would say. And that's all I got for you guys on today's episode of Locked On Nets, this Fan Take Friday. I apologize if I did not get to your questions. There was a few that I couldn't get to. We're getting a lot. In the future, I'll try to do a part 2. I'm not going to be able to this week because the Nets have a game tomorrow night. I'm going to pod after that. But thank you to all of you who continue to submit questions, continue to participate, and allow me to do these mailbag episodes. I have a lot of fun with them, and I've gotten a really good response to them. But if you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy my content, take a second right now, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But the Nets are going to be back in action on Friday against the Boston Celtics at Barclays Center. So I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.